Well, well, well. Look where you found yourself again, lost traveler. Tonight we have a story I personally wrote, and let me tell you, it's graphic, it's violent, and it doesn't pull punches. This one's loaded with profanity, brutal deaths, and the kind of visceral horror that sticks with you long after the story ends. If you have a weak heart or a soft mind, well, you may want to turn back now, because this one gets brutal. We're talking torn flesh, shattered bones, and men dying hard in the deep woods where nobody can hear them scream. Still here? Good. You've been warned. Now, without further ado, let's get started, shall we? The technical term my client used was Canis sapiens anthropophagus. I'd never heard it called that before, though. Most people who'd spent time in the backwoods of Michigan just called them dogmen. If you've never heard of dogmen before, well, prepare yourself. You won't forget them. Picture something built like a man who'd been stretched on a rack, spine elongated, limbs gangling with ropey muscle under coarse fur that came in rust red or charcoal. The head belonged on something else entirely, wolf skull, elongated and heavy, jaws filled with teeth designed to puncture through to marrow. They moved through forests the way special forces moved through enemy territory, coordinated and tactically sound. And one haunting detail you will never forget. They remembered faces. People have died. Hunters who pushed too deep into the Manistee National Forest during October. Hikers who wandered off marked trails. The bodies that turned up got filed as bear attacks, even when the tracks showed 2 legs instead of 4. That's how simple people describe these deaths. Always blame it on bears. By this point, bears have a bad rap. That's what we were after. That's what motivated our client's offer of $150,000. That's what led us into the autumn woods, carrying enough ammunition to hold a siege. And that's what tore through my crew like we were made of paper, leaving me to crawl out of those woods alone, covered in blood that mostly wasn't mine. Procurers, the sanitized term for what we did. We existed in the space between security contracting and organized crime, acquiring things for clients whose shopping lists included items that were illegal, impossible, or both. We didn't debate ethics. We didn't question motives. The money justified everything, or at least that's what I told myself during the jobs that made sleep difficult afterward. I went by Apex in professional circles, though my mother had named me Mark 38 years ago in a Detroit hospital that had since been condemned and demolished. Team lead. The one who interfaced with clients and made sure contracts got fulfilled, no matter how questionable the ask. I'd built my reputation on completing jobs that made other crews walk away, which meant I'd also built a decent retirement fund and a prescription for anxiety medication. I forced down my gullet. My crew for this job consisted of 3 men I'd worked with before, each carrying code names because our line of work didn't mix well with legal identities. Grendel, real name Raymond, though he'd laugh and tell you he'd answer to Ray if you bought him a drink first. 53 years old, Anishinaabe, born and raised on the Bay Mills Reservation up near Sault Ste. Marie. His grandfather had been a trapper, his father a hunting guide, and Ray had inherited both skill sets, along with a 6th sense for reading terrain that bordered on supernatural. He could track a deer through 3 miles of mixed forest in a snowstorm, could tell you what had passed through an area just by studying disturbed leaves, could navigate by stars and moss and the way water flowed over stones. Hell, he could tell you what you ate last week just by smelling your farts. He'd come to our line of work the hard way. A timber company had bought up land his family had hunted for generations, turned it into clear-cut wasteland, and his subsequent protest had earned him 18 months in county lockup for destruction of private property. When he got out, the legitimate economy wanted nothing to do with him. Our economy didn't care about his record. Ray was lean as jerky, with hands that never stopped moving, and eyes that catalogued everything. He wore his salt and pepper hair in a long braid, and had a habit of humming old Ojibwe songs when he was thinking. He'd worked with me on 6 previous jobs, and I trusted his instincts more than I trusted my own sometimes. Fletch, Malcolm, 31, from a military family in North Carolina where 3 generations had served with distinction. He'd done 2 tours in Afghanistan with the 75th Ranger Regiment, earned a Bronze Star, and a medical discharge after an IED took most of his hearing in his left ear. He could still shoot better than anyone I'd ever met, could field strip and reassemble an M4 blindfolded, could calculate windage and elevation in his head faster than most people could work a ballistic calculator. What he couldn't do was adjust to civilian life. The structure, the purpose, the clear delineation between mission objectives and completion. The regular world didn't offer that. He'd tried construction work, tried private security at shopping malls, tried everything that promised discipline and routine. Nothing stuck. The first time I'd hired him for a job, he'd shown up 2 hours early with his gear already packed, and a look in his eyes like a man who'd finally found his way home. Malcolm was tall and wiry, with the kind of nervous energy that made him constantly check his equipment. He wore his sandy hair in a high and tight despite nobody requiring it, and he had a habit of quoting ranger school instructors verbatim when he was stressed. His approach to every problem could be summed up as, apply sufficient firepower until problem ceases to exist. Then there was Kodiak. Name, Lucas, 36. And if you called him Luke, he'd correct you exactly once before ignoring you completely. He'd grown up in Kodiak, Alaska, hence the nickname, in a family that treated survival skills the way other families treated piano lessons. His father had been a crab fisherman, his uncle a hunting guide, and Lucas had spent his childhood learning that in Alaska, hesitation meant death, and second place meant the bears ate well. He'd killed his first grizzly at 19, alone, after it had mauled his dog during a hunting trip. The dog, a Malamute named Sergeant, had survived with a torn ear and a permanent limp. Lucas had tracked the bear for 2 days through a snowstorm, caught up to it in a narrow canyon, and put it down with a hunting knife after his rifle jammed. He still carried that knife, the handle wrapped in paracord that had been Sergeant's collar. Lucas was 6'4", and built like something you'd see pulling a plow in old photographs. Broad shoulders, thick arms, hands that looked like they could crush walnuts. He kept his dark hair buzzed short and sported a beard that he trimmed with the same knife he'd used on that grizzly. He spoke rarely, moved with surprising quiet for his size, and had an intensity about him that made people instinctively step back when he entered a room. The 4 of us met at a truck stop outside Lansing 2 days before the job. Malcolm arrived first, naturally, checking his gear in the parking lot. Ray showed up an hour later with a thermos of coffee and a paper bag full of gas station donuts. "Breakfast of champions," he'd said, offering the bag around. "That's diabetes in a bag," Malcolm had replied, but he'd taken 2 anyway. Lucas arrived last, driving a beat-up pickup that looked like it had survived multiple apocalypses. He'd brought his own gear in a duffel that hit the pavement with a thud, suggesting either excessive ammunition or a dead body. "You packed the whole armory?" Ray had asked. "Just the essentials," Lucas had replied, deadpan. "Your definition of essential concerns me." "Most things about me should." We'd gone over the job details in a booth at the truck stop, spreading maps across sticky formica, while a waitress who'd clearly stopped caring about life sometime in the 90s refilled our coffee. "So let me get this straight," Malcolm had said, studying the topographical map. "Rich asshole wants to serve cryptid meat at a dinner party. We go into the woods, kill a dogman, haul it back out, and collect $150,000. "That's the contract," I'd confirmed. "Cryptid meat," Ray had said slowly. "He wants to eat a dogman." "Apparently they're a delicacy. According to the client, the meat is unlike anything else. Gamey, rich, with a flavor profile that no conventional animal can match. He's hosting some kind of exclusive feast for his elite friends. Wants to serve them something they've never experienced before." "That's the most bougie thing I've ever heard," Malcolm had said. And I once worked security for a wedding that had ice sculptures of the couple's cats. How much is he paying again? Lucas had asked. $150 total, 75 up front, 75 on delivery. For one dogman, preferably a large male. He wants at least 200 pounds of harvestable meat. Ray had been quiet, studying the map with his finger tracing the boundary of the dead pine tract. This area, he'd said finally. My people have stories about this area. Old stories. What kind of stories? I'd asked. The kind where things with wolf heads walk on two legs and hunt in packs. The kind where people who go into the deep woods during October don't come back. Ray had looked up from the map. My grandmother said the dogmen were sacred, spirits of the forest. She said killing one was like declaring war on the land itself. Your grandmother also said you shouldn't whistle at night or you'd summon snakes, Malcolm had pointed out. And I don't whistle at night, do I? That's just good sense. Nobody wants to hear you whistle. Fuck you, I whistle beautifully. You whistle like a dying tea kettle. Despite the banter, I could see the concern in Ray's eyes. He wasn't superstitious, at least not in the way that interfered with work. But he respected the old stories in a way that Malcolm and Lucas didn't. They'd grown up in worlds where predators were just animals, dangerous but understandable. Ray had grown up hearing about things that blurred the line between animal and something else. Look, I'd said, I know this one's unusual, but it's what we do. Rich people want weird shit. We provide it. The client's done his research. He knows these things exist, knows where to find them, knows they're dangerous. That's why he's paying top dollar instead of hiring random hunters. Has he actually seen one? Lucas had asked. He says his grandfather hunted them back in the 50s. Family tradition, apparently. The old man killed one, served it at some kind of private gathering, and it became this legendary story in their social circle. Now the grandson wants to recreate it. Prove he's as capable as Grandpa was. Rich people are fucking weird, Malcolm had muttered. Rich people are our livelihood, I'd corrected. And this particular rich person is offering us enough money to coast for a while. Ray had grimaced but nodded. My daughter's tuition is due next month, $40,000. So yeah, I'm in. Just, we need to be smart about this. These aren't deer. They're not even bears. If the stories are true, they think, they plan, they remember. We'll be smart, I'd promised. Full tactical approach. Overlapping fields of fire, constant communication. Nobody goes off alone. We treat this like a combat op, not a hunting trip. And if there's more than one? Lucas had asked. Then we adapt. Take one down, extract, mission complete. We're not trying to wipe out the whole population. Just need one specimen. Malcolm had leaned back in the booth, his coffee cup empty. You know what I like about this job? It's straightforward. No hostage negotiation, no delicate extraction, no political bullshit. Just track, kill, retrieve. Simple. Nothing about this is simple, Ray had said quietly, but he'd been smiling when he said it. The meeting with the client had happened a week earlier, in a penthouse overlooking Lake Michigan. The place was all glass walls and furniture that cost more than most people dreamed of earning. Original art on the walls, paintings I recognized from auction catalogues, the kind that went for 7 figures. He was younger than I'd expected, maybe 45. Tall, athletic build, with a tan that probably came from yacht clubs and ski resorts instead of actual labor. His handshake was firm, practiced, the grip of someone who'd learned how to make people think he worked for his money. Mark, he'd said, like we were old friends. Thank you for coming. Can I offer you a drink? I'm fine. Suit yourself. He'd poured himself 2 fingers of something amber from a crystal decanter. I assume my message intrigued you. It intrigued my accountant, I'd replied. $150,000 is serious money for a hunting contract. It's not a hunting contract. It's an acquisition of extremely rare culinary material. He'd smiled, sipping his drink. Do you know anything about dogmen, Mark? I know the folklore. Bipedal canines, reported mostly in Michigan and Wisconsin. Sightings go back over a century. Most people think they're hoaxes or misidentified bears. Most people are idiots. He'd walked to the windows, looking out over the lake. My grandfather killed one in 1952, October, Manistee National Forest. He was part of a hunting party, 3 men, all experienced outdoorsmen. They'd been tracking deer when they found tracks. Massive, 5-toed bipedal. They followed them for 2 days. He turned back to face me. On the 3rd day they found it, 7 feet tall, rust-colored fur, wolf skull the size of a basketball. It charged them. My grandfather dropped it with 3 rounds from a .30-06, took all 3 men to drag it out of the woods. And they ate it. They served it at a private gathering, 20 guests, all men of means and influence. My grandfather had it butchered by a chef who'd worked in Paris, prepared it as a roast with herbs and wine. He said it was the finest meat he'd ever tasted. Rich, complex, with a flavor that no domestic animal could replicate. The client had finished his drink, set the glass down with a decisive click. That dinner became legendary in certain circles. For decades afterward, men would ask my grandfather about it. They'd offer ridiculous sums of money for him to hunt another one, to recreate that experience. He always refused, said once was enough, that he'd proven what needed proving. But you want to prove it again. I want to honor his memory. And yes, I want to experience what he experienced. He'd walked to a cabinet, pulled out a photograph. Black and white, faded, showing 3 men standing over a massive dark shape on the ground. Even in the poor quality image, I could see the elongated skull, the muscular limbs. This is real, I'd said, studying the photo. Very real, and I know where to find them. My grandfather kept journals, detailed accounts of where they hunted, what signs to look for, when the creatures are most active. October, always October. The dead pine tract specifically. He documented everything. He'd handed me a folder, maps, notes, sketches of tracks and territorial markers. I'm not sending you in blind. I'm giving you 70 years of accumulated knowledge. All you need to do is follow his path, find one, and bring it back. Dead or alive? Dead. Field dressed if possible. I'll have refrigerated transport waiting. The meat needs to stay fresh. I'm hosting a gathering in 3 weeks, and I intend to serve dogmen to my guests. They're flying in from around the world for this. It needs to be perfect. I'd studied the materials, my mind already running calculations. The money was extraordinary. The job seemed straightforward enough. Track, kill, extract. We'd done more complicated contracts for less pay. What about legal issues? I'd asked. If these things are real, there might be protections, endangered species considerations. He'd laughed. They don't officially exist, Mark. Can't protect something that isn't recognized by science. And even if someone raised questions, I have enough lawyers to bury any investigation under paperwork until everyone involved retires or dies. You've thought this through. I've thought of nothing else for 3 years. This isn't impulse, it's destiny. My grandfather achieved something remarkable, and I intend to match it. Are you in? I'd looked at the photograph again, thought about how money had a way of making the impossible seem reasonable. I'm in, I'd said, but I'll need full operational autonomy. My team, my tactics, no interference. Agreed. I'll provide the research, the location, the transport. You provide the results. We'd shaken hands. His palm had been dry, his grip confident. As I'd left the penthouse, I'd glanced back once. He'd been standing at the windows again, looking out over the lake with the expression of a man who'd already won whatever game he thought we were playing. We drove north 3 days later in a rented SUV with enough ammunition to start a small war. Malcolm had packed his usual arsenal, multiple rifles, shotguns, sidearms, and his beloved .458 SOCOM. Ray had brought tracking gear and his grandfather's old Remington 870. Lucas had his hunting knife and a lever-action 45-70 that looked like it had been forged sometime during the Theodore Roosevelt administration. "That thing even fire?" Malcolm had asked, eyeing the rifle. "Used it on my grizzly kill," Lucas had replied. "The one you stabbed to death. After this jammed, yeah. Got it fixed since then." "You trust your life to a gun that jammed during your most important shot?" "I trust my life to my knife. The gun's just for convenience." Ray had laughed from the passenger seat. "You know, Lucas, most people would buy a new rifle after that. Most people didn't earn this one. There was a story there, something about Lucas's father giving him the rifle, some whole Alaska manhood ritual that none of us were Alaskan enough to understand. Lucas didn't elaborate, and we didn't push. Everyone had their superstitions, their rituals. Lucas's just happened to involve a rifle that had failed him at the worst possible moment. We stopped for gas about 40 miles from our destination. Small town, one of those places that existed purely to service hunters and tourists passing through. The gas station sold fishing licenses and ammunition alongside the regular convenience store stock. The kid working the register couldn't have been more than 19, with the glazed expression of someone counting down the minutes until their shift ended. He barely looked up as we paid for coffee and snacks. "You boys hunting?" he'd asked, more out of boredom than interest. "Something like that," I'd replied. "Lot of hunters this time of year, deer season." He'd bagged our purchases. "You heading into the Manistee?" "Further north, Dead Pine Tract." The kid had paused just for a second. "Huh, don't get many people going out that way." "Why's that?" He'd shrugged. "Just, people say it's bad luck. Hunters go in there, don't see anything. Waste of time, mostly." "We'll take our chances," Malcolm had said. "Your funeral," the kid had replied, but he'd been smiling when he said it, like it was a joke instead of a warning. We'd loaded back into the SUV, and Ray had been quiet as we pulled back onto the highway. "You okay?" I'd asked. "That kid," Ray had said. "He knew something. Saw it in his face when you mentioned Dead Pine. He's a kid, probably just repeating local gossip. Local gossip usually has roots in truth. You having second thoughts?" Ray had been quiet for a moment, watching the pine forests blur past. "I'm having all the thoughts, but I'm still here, aren't I?" We reached the access point just before noon, a weed-choked parking area where a forgotten logging road disappeared into thick forest. The client's refrigerated truck was already there, driver leaning against the hood, smoking a cigarette. He was older, maybe 60, with the look of someone who'd spent most of his life outdoors and hadn't enjoyed any of it. "You the acquisition team?" he'd asked. "That's us," I'd confirmed. "Boss says you're bringing back something big. Wouldn't say what." He'd ground out his cigarette under his boot. "I'll be here when you get back, however long that takes. You need help loading, I'm your guy. Otherwise, I don't ask questions and I don't tell stories." "Smart policy," Lucas had said. "Only policy that keeps you employed in this line of work." The driver had climbed back into his truck cab. "Good luck out there. Try not to die." "Inspirational," Malcolm had muttered as we started gearing up. The transformation from normal people to tactical operators took about 20 minutes. Tactical vests, communication headsets, weapons checks, ammunition counts. Malcolm went through his ritual of checking every magazine twice. Ray tested his shotgun's action. Lucas sharpened his knife with a whetstone he kept in his pack. I'd watched them work, each man falling into familiar patterns, and felt something like pride. These were professionals. Whatever we found in those woods, we'd handle it. "Dead Pine Tract is about 6 miles in," Ray had said, studying his GPS unit. "Trails overgrown but passable on foot. According to the client's grandfather's notes, we're looking for territorial markers, claw marks on trees, scat piles, disturbed ground where they've been digging." "And if we find one?" Malcolm had asked. "We take it down clean. Headshots if possible. The client wants the meat intact. We field dress it on site, haul it back here. 200 pounds of dead cryptid, Lucas had said, through 6 miles of forest. We brought the game cart, I'd reminded him. It'll be work, but manageable. Everything's manageable until it isn't. Ray had shouldered his pack, checked his compass. You know, my grandmother used to say that the forest tests you before it teaches you. What's that supposed to mean? Malcolm had asked. Means we're about to find out if we're students or examples. And with that cheerful thought, we'd headed into the woods. The dead pine tract earned its name within the first mile. What should have been vibrant autumn woodland had become a graveyard of skeletal trees, their bark-stripped trunks reaching toward an overcast sky. The undergrowth had gone wild in the absence of canopy cover, brambles chest-high, dense thickets that forced us into single file. Ecological die-off, Ray had explained, studying the dead trees. Happens sometimes. Beetle infestation, disease, drought. Whole sections of forest just give up. Cheerful, Malcolm had said. Nature's not cheerful. Nature's efficient. We'd pushed deeper, and the deeper we got, the quieter it was. Too quiet, Lucas had said. Noticed that, I'd replied. Could just be the time of year. Could be, he'd agreed, but his hand had drifted to his rifle. 2 miles in, Ray had stopped abruptly, fist raised. We'd frozen. Mark, he'd said quietly, gesturing to a nearby tree. Claw marks scored what bark remained on the tree. They were fresh. The exposed wood hadn't darkened yet from oxidation. Malcolm had approached carefully, studying the marks. What the hell made these? This our dogman? Nothing good, Ray had said. He'd been scanning the surrounding trees, and I could see more marks. Lots more. These are territory markers, and they're recent, maybe 24 hours old. How can you tell? Sap's still tacky. Give it another day and it'll harden. I'd examined them more closely. This wasn't random scratching. This was communication. A message written in wood and resin that said, "This is ours." You seeing what I'm seeing? Lucas had asked, pointing to varying heights of marks on different trees. Multiple individuals, Ray had confirmed, different sizes. At least 3, maybe more. The client said we'd find one, I'd said. The client's grandfather's notes are 70 years old, Ray had replied. A lot can change in 70 years. Populations shift, territories expand. So, what are you saying? I'm saying we might not be hunting a lone dogman. We might be walking into a pack's territory. Malcolm had chambered around. Then we hunt smarter, stay together, watch each other's backs, take down whatever we encounter first. And if there are more, then we fucking kill 'em all, he'd said. But I'd heard the tension in his voice. We'd continued forward, weapons at the ready, and I'd found myself studying every shadow, every shift in the undergrowth. The forest felt different now after seeing those marks. It wasn't just quiet. It was like we were being watched by multiple eyes, like we'd crossed an invisible boundary, and something on the other side had taken notice. Movement, Ray had hissed suddenly. 10 o'clock. We'd spun, rifles up, scanning the dead pines. For a moment, nothing. Then I'd caught it, a dark shape weaving between trunks about 50 yards out. It had been pacing us, staying just out of clear sight. Contact, I'd said into my headset. Hold positions. The shape had stopped, and I'd gotten my first real look at the dogman. It was every bit of 7 feet tall, rust-colored fur, darker along the spine. The head was pure wolf, elongated snout, triangular ears. It had been standing upright on digitigrade legs, powerful haunches that suggested explosive speed. And it had been staring directly at us with amber eyes. Holy shit, Malcolm had breathed. It's real. It's actually fucking real. The creature slightly shifted its head, studying us the way a human might study insects under glass. Then, it had opened its jaws and let out a primal vocalization that made my blood turn to pure ice. It had been answered by 2 more calls from different directions. "Multiple contacts," Lucas had said. "We're surrounded." That's when I'd realized our mistake. We hadn't been hunting them. They'd been hunting us. And we just walked right into their kill zone. "Defensive formation," I'd barked. "Back to back, overlapping fields of fire." We'd formed up, each man covering a cardinal direction. I could see them now. They were circling our position. Pack hunters. "I count 4, Ray had said, his shotgun tracking movement to our left. "No, 5. Jesus Christ, there's at least 5 of them." "Rules of engagement?" Malcolm had asked, his voice tight. "Weapons free. Anything that charges, you drop it." The rust-colored one, the one I'd seen first, had stepped out from behind a tree. It was terrifying beyond belief. It had taken another step forward, lips pulling back to reveal sharp teeth that glistened from the saliva dripping from its maw. A low rumble had built in its chest. "Mark," Malcolm had said quietly. "Your call. Do we engage or extract?" The client's offer had flashed through my mind. $150,000. Ray's daughter's tuition, Malcolm's medical bills, Lucas's truck. All we needed was one clean kill, one specimen, and we'd be set for months. I'd settled my rifle sights on the rust-colored male's chest. "We came here for a reason," I'd said. "On my mark. 3, 2. The attack had come from our blind spot. One of them, smaller, charcoal-furred, faster than the others, had broken from the tree line at full sprint. It had closed 30 yards in a matter of seconds. "Contact rear!" Lucas had roared, spinning and firing. His .45-70 had boomed like a cannon. The round had caught the charging Dogman center mass, the impact actually stopping its forward momentum. It had staggered. It was wounded, dripping blood from the wound onto the ground beneath. "Again!" I'd shouted. Lucas had levered another round, fired. This one had taken the creature in the skull. It blew the brains straight out the back, a massive hole left in its head. It had collapsed hard, skidding through dead leaves, blood and brain matter leaking out its ruined skull, and stopped moving about 10 feet from our position. For a heartbeat, everything had been still. Then the forest had erupted. They'd come from every direction at once, a coordinated assault that hit us like a tidal wave. I'd fired on automatic, burning through my magazine into the mass of charging fur. One had gone down, maybe 2. There had been too many to count, too many to stop. Malcolm's .458 had been doing work, each shot dropping a target with devastating efficiency, but I'd seen the fear in his face as he'd burned through his ammunition. "Reloading!" he'd shouted. That's when the rust-colored male had made its move. It had sprinted directly at Malcolm, not zigzagging like the others, just raw speed and commitment. Malcolm had dropped his rifle, reached for his sidearm, but the creature had been too fast. It had hit Malcolm like a freight train. The impact had driven him backwards into a tree trunk, and I heard him scream in pain as his back had broke from the impact. The dogman's jaws had closed on his upper arm and bit through tactical vest and flesh and bone. Malcolm's scream had been cut short, as those jaws had shaken him like a dog with a chew toy, tearing his arm completely away at the socket. Malcolm had slid down the tree trunk, his remaining hand pressing against the arterial spray from his shoulder. His eyes had found mine, wide with shock and pain, and I'd seen him mouth something. Maybe run, maybe sorry, before the creature's jaws had closed on his skull. There was a final wet crunch, as his skull was obliterated, and blood and brain sprayed in every direction and leaked out the dogman's mouth. That wet crunch of bone giving way would haunt me for the rest of my life. "Malcolm! Die, you ugly motherfucker!" Ray had been firing his shotgun, pumping rounds into the rust-colored male, but it had ignored the impacts, too focused on its kill. This one was stronger than the rest, Another one had circled behind our position and gone for Ray. The old tracker had tried to spin, tried to bring his shotgun around, but the creature had been too close. It had swatted the weapon aside and picked him up and slammed Ray face first into the ground. Ray had fought. I'd give him that. Even with a dogman on his back, claws sinking into his flesh, he'd been reaching for his knife, still trying to fight. But the creature had bitten down on the back of his neck, and I'd heard vertebrae snap like dry kindling. Ray's body had spasmed once, then gone limp. "No!" Lucas had been roaring, swinging his rifle like a club, cracking skulls with each impact. He'd killed 2 more. I'd seen their bodies crumpled at his feet, but there had been too many. A juvenile had circled around and hamstrung him. Lucas had gone to one knee with a bellow of rage and pain, still swinging, still fighting. 3 of them had hit him simultaneously. They'd borne him to the ground through sheer weight, and even then Lucas had been fighting. I'd seen him punch one's eye socket, had seen him grab another by the throat with his bare hands and squeeze until something started to crunch. But jaws had found his stomach, tore through vest and flesh, and his intestines had unspooled across the dead leaves like rope. Another had bitten into his thigh, tearing away muscle in wet chunks. Lucas had still been conscious when they'd started feeding. His eyes had met mine one last time, and I'd seen something there. Not fear, not even pain. Just a grim acknowledgement that this was how it ended, that the grizzly had been practice for this moment. Then he'd screamed, and the sound had been enough to break something fundamental in my understanding of what the human body could endure. I'd run. No thought, no planning, no heroic stand. Just blind animal panic driving my legs, making me crash through the undergrowth, branches tearing at my face, roots trying to trip me. Behind me I'd heard the wet sounds of feeding, the crack of bones. Lucas's screams finally cutting off into a gurgle that somehow sounded worse than the screaming. And then, the pursuit. Heavy bodies moving through brush with terrible purpose, the snap of breaking branches, the panting breath of predators that had tasted blood and wanted more. I'd burst through a thicket and found myself at the edge of a ravine, maybe 20 feet deep, steep sides, a creek running through the bottom. No time to consider alternatives. I'd jumped. The landing had driven the air from my lungs, sent pain shooting through my left ankle. I'd forced myself up, splashed through the creek, started scrambling up the opposite side. The earth had been loose, crumbling under my fingers. I'd heard them at the ravine's edge above me, heard their panting breath. One had jumped. It had hit the creek bed behind me, recovered instantly, started climbing. I'd been 10 feet from the top when claws had raked my calf, tore through fabric and flesh. I'd kicked backward, felt my boot connect with something solid, heard a yelp of pain, heard a splash as it fell back into the creek. My hand had found a root. I'd pulled, hauled myself over the edge, kept running. The forest had become a blur. I'd had no idea which direction I was going, couldn't spare the focus to check the GPS. All that mattered was distance, was putting space between me and the pack. I'd run until my legs gave out, until I'd collapsed behind a fallen log and lay there gasping, tasting copper in my mouth. My calf was a mess of torn flesh, bleeding freely. My tactical vest was shredded. My rifle was gone. I'd lost it somewhere in the flight. The forest around me had been silent. I'd lain there for what felt like hours, waiting for them to find me, to finish what they'd started. But the attack never came. Eventually, I'd forced myself to move, to check the GPS with shaking hands. 2 miles from the access point, I'd limped through the forest as darkness fell, using trees for support, leaving a blood trail that any predator could follow. But they hadn't followed. They'd made their point, eliminated the threat. The rest was cleanup they couldn't be bothered with. Or maybe, and this thought had made my skin crawl, maybe they'd let me go deliberately. Let me escape so I could carry the message back. This is our territory. Stay out. The parking area had appeared through the trees like a mirage. The refrigerated truck was still there. the driver asleep in the cab. He'd sat up when I'd emerged from the tree line, taken one look at me, and gone pale. "Jesus Christ, what happened? Where's the rest of your—" "Drive," I'd said. "Now." He hadn't asked questions. I'd climbed into the refrigerated truck, empty, waiting for a cargo that would never arrive. As we'd pulled away, I'd looked back at the tree line one last time. Something had been standing there, just visible in the fading light, tall, rust-colored, watching me leave with amber eyes, the same one that had killed Malcolm. It had tilted its head, almost like a nod, then turned and disappeared back into the forest. I'd made the phone call from a gas station 30 miles south after I'd cleaned the worst of the blood off in the bathroom. My hands had been shaking so badly I'd barely been able to dial. The client had answered on the second ring. "Status report. Contracts void." Silence. Then, "Explain." "My entire crew is dead, torn apart and eaten by a pack of at least 15 of those things. You want your Dogman?" My voice had been shaking, and I hadn't cared. "You go get it your fucking self." I'd hung up before he could respond, pulled the battery from the phone, broke it in half and thrown both pieces into a dumpster. 3 days later, I was in a different state, using a different name, trying to sleep without seeing Lucas's intestines unspooling across dead leaves, trying to unhear Ray's neck snapping, trying to forget Malcolm's last look, the acceptance in his eyes as the rust-colored mail had finished him. The money from the advance kept me comfortable. The nightmares kept me honest. I never took another job. And somewhere in the dead pine tract, where skeletal trees stand like monuments to human arrogance, the pack continues its eternal patrol of the boundary between their world and ours. I think about them sometimes, about how easily they'd killed us, about how we'd walked into their territory, carrying enough firepower to start a war, and they'd shredded us like we were made of pathetic bags of useless flesh. The client had wanted rare meat for his exclusive feast, had wanted to prove he was as capable as his grandfather, as worthy of respect and admiration. Instead, he'd sent 4 men into a forest that didn't belong to us anymore. We'd gone hunting for a trophy, for money to solve our problems, for validation. They'd reminded us what it meant to be prey, and in the end, the only feast was theirs. I hope you enjoyed that journey into my twisted mind. I hope I didn't scare you too much. Though, let's be honest, if you made it this far, you probably enjoyed every brutal second of it. If you're enjoying these stories and want to support what I do here, consider checking out my Patreon or buying me a coffee. Both are linked in the video description below. Your support really helps me keep all this running and allows me to keep bringing you these dark tales from the places most people are too smart to venture. Until next time, dear listener, sleep tight, and maybe keep the lights on tonight.